Good morning. Y'all pray with me, please. Gracious Heavenly Father, we come asking you to forgive us of our sins, to say thank you for everything you do for us individually and corporately. To ask you that you give us guidance. Let us do things that are pleasing to you. Expand our coast, our territories. Let us do good for this state. I ask these things in your Son's name. Amen. Okay. Mr. Hitchens.
Yes, sir. I have two bills today. Both of them come from the Department of Veteran Services. The first one is House Bill 322, right in the middle of the first page under Modified Open. What this does is changes the eligibility dates for access to the War Veterans Home in Georgia from January 31st to 55 to the end of the Vietnam War, which was May 7, 75, and updates it to August 1st, 1990 to include those who served in Desert Storm.
Any questions? No questions. Thank next bill.
The next bill is House Bill 422, which I think is fifth up from the bottom, also under Modified Open Rule. What this does is some of us in here are kind of proud of Luke Bryan, myself, the leader, and Jan, who all went to Georgia Southern where he went. He wants to donate money to the Georgia War Veterans Home, and there's not a process in place. So what the Legislative Council has done is drawn up a 501c3, much like the university system uses, so that he and some of his fellow country music singers can donate money to the Georgia War Veterans homes and receive IRS deductions for it. That's it.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Tanner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I come to ask for House Bill 338. It's on the second page, third up from the bottom. This is the education reform legislation we've been working on for some time now to help the lowest performing schools in the state. Be glad to answer any questions.
No questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Dickey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Come this morning asking for HB 114. It's on front page, third one down. It's the Move On When Ready Act. Simply prohibits school systems from excluding students when they take these dual credit courses and from valedictorian to salutatorian, and just makes those eligible for those two honors.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Dollar. Committee chairs get to be first. You're good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring before the committee HB 196. You can find it on the third page. And 196 is the result of a joint Senate-House study committee over the interim, which I co-chaired with Senator Mullis. We were tasked with looking at the music industry in Georgia, how to boost up that industry, create jobs, and spur economic development. Basically, it's a one-page bill. It creates a royalty tax, royalty income tax exemption for Georgia talent, sir.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Raffensperger, you can do it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I asked today for two bills on page one, Modified Open Rule HB 87 that came through the Small Business Development Committee. That would provide for up to 3 years for annual registrations through the Secretary of State for your corporate re-registrations.
No questions. Other bill.
Next one.
You got another one?
Yes, sir. I have House Bill 375. That came through Ways and Means, and that's a cleanup of a couple words in the code, like on line 13, changing after to before, which was incorrect. And there's also rescinding in Section 2 on line 71, allowing a tax commissioner to earn a fee for tax executions. That should only affect one county, best I can tell. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Willard.
Did I move too fast? That was
Almost.
that was HB 375, structured rule, bottom of.
Mr. Rassenberg, isn't that a bill that applies mostly to Fulton County because our tax commission has been charging a greater sum for these cancellation of five-phase?
Yes, sir. Fulton County is the only county that we have found that charges that. It's 50 cents per tax lien.
That's right. No other county does.
And no other county, sir, I could find. Thank you.
No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Kendrick.
Good morning. I am asking for HB 78, which is the very first bill, and this is a bill that is supported by the Secretary of State, and the language was drafted by the Secretary of State. And what HB 78 does is update our current securities code, and it allows the Georgia Secretary of State to continue to do what they've always done, which is to require companies that raise capital within our state to file a notice with the Secretary of State, and this is needed because of new updates to the federal law.
No questions. Thanks. Mr. Estration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Rules Committee. My bill is on the second page, middle of the page, under Modified Structure Rule, HB 221, HB 221. Mr. Chairman, this is the first time on your calendar. It is the Uniform Power of Attorney Act, allowing standardized power of attorney rules and operation, standardized form, and giving law enforcement the tools needed to protect individuals, the principal with these powers of attorney. Chairwoman Cooper got me involved in this issue over a year ago. It's been a lot of work on this bill, as covered in media reports over the weekend. Would appreciate the committee's favorable consideration.
Mr. Willard.
Thank you. Mr. Estration, I remember seeing an article in the paper yesterday. There was a lady in Cobb County who had over $4,000 stolen from her from someone using a power of attorney, and $4 million, not 4,000, $4 million, which was unbelievable. And this bill would be a tool that the GBI and the district attorneys, prosecuting attorneys of state, can use to stop that type of conduct happening.
Yes, sir. The bill provides explicitly that use of a power of attorney would constitute a crime under our elder abuse statute, so that law enforcement doesn't classify these offenses as a civil matter and refuse to investigate or prosecute them.
No more questions. Thank you. Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Page 1, modified open, HB 448, 4 from the bottom, 448. This is agency legislation for the Georgia Non-Public Post-Secondary Education Commission, commonly known as NPEC. It strengthens original legislative intent, squares them up with some recommendations that they have received from the Attorney General's office, and finally reduces the size of their board somewhat from 15 members down to 11 members for budget efficiency purposes, Mr. Chairman.
No questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Werkheiser.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. On page 2, 4, 5 from the bottom is House Bill 319. This changes the limit on habeas corpus. This would only affect 4 counties, but these 4 counties are greatly affected. They have state prisons there, but the counties are having to fund the habeas corpus ruling, so this would help those 4 counties.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Dubnik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring 3 bills this morning. The first is HB 275 on the second page under modified structure halfway down. I bring this on behalf of the Georgia DNR with housekeeping language, as it's an important public safety measure for boating.
No questions. Next one.
House Bill 403 under modified open, about 2/3 of the way down on the first page, defines the number of members of the Interstate Cooperation Committee.
No questions. Next one.
Lastly, HB 432 on the third page at the very top under modified structure amends the requirement for a non-proprietary institution of higher education to receive certain state funding.
You got socks on?
No, sir.
Have you read that red book?
Yes, sir.
Put socks on.
Yes, sir.
No questions.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is modified open on the first page, House Bill 234. This is a simple little crosswalk bill that's y'all have let out a couple times. This version is slightly changed. It keeps getting hung up over at the other chamber, and we ask for your consideration to let it go again.
No questions. You got another one?
No, sir, not at this time.
That's all. Thank you.
you.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the
You
committee.
got socks on?
Yes, sir.
Show them to him.
You want to see them? They're festive today. Atlanta socks because we're getting close to baseball season, Mr. Chairman.
Tell Mr. Dudnick we can wear some wild ones, but wear some of them.
I'll see if I can find him a pair, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Under modified structure on page 2, I have House Bill 266, which just updates the dollar amount for when a minor will have to get a conservator appointed in the probate court from $15,000 to $25,000.
No questions. Next.
On page 3 under structured, House Bill 118 puts forth consumer protections for the 1.5 million Georgians who are playing fantasy sports in our state.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. HB 137 is the fourth one on the first page under modified open, fourth bill down, HB 137. Essentially, there are DAs throughout the state that are subcontracting work for civil asset forfeiture proceedings. They're not using contracts and they're expending public funds. So this would require that there be a contract on file, first and foremost, and secondly, that there could be no relationship between the value of the property that's being seized under civil asset forfeiture and the compensation of the subcontracted attorney.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm bringing today House Bill 401. It's on page 2 in modified structure. It's the last bill on the page. And it's just updating or expanding to let motorcycle riders not just use the headset to talk to other riders, but also allows them to use it for things like listen to the GPS so they're not looking down at their phones, which makes it more dangerous for all personnel on the road.
No questions. Next one.
Thank you.
I thought you had another one. Mr. Clark, you got another bill? No, never mind. Mr. Bodie.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of this committee. I'm bringing back today House Bill 67, which makes carjacking in the second degree a new offense. It also eliminates the word vehicle from the burglary in the second degree code. And I will ask for the favorable consideration of this committee for House Bill 67.
No, No questions, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You read that thing correctly this time, right, Mr. Clark? Yes, Mr. Mr. Kirby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 2, under modified structure, 6 from the bottom, I bring you House Bill 287. It simply allows our Gold Star families to get a second Gold Star plate, having paid the ultimate price of losing a family member in the line of duty.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Carson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, third page under structured rule, 2 bills, House Bill 145. This basically applies a different methodology in regard to computing state sales tax on jet fuel.
Well, the board's lit up, but we're not going to ask anybody anything on that one. Next bill.
House Bill 217, this is a income tax credit expansion of the qualified education expense credit under Title 48. This is in regard to student scholarship organizations. This actually takes the program from a current cap of $58 million to a new cap of $65 million with 10% increases thereon if the credits are fully subscribed.
No questions, thank you. Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having me back. I bring today House Bill 391. It's under modified rule 7, 7th from the bottom. And it's just expanding on the Newborn Act of 2002 to allow a mother who's abandoning her baby or protecting it, she could be in a tough situation, to allow her not to have to give her name and address. And then also expands it from 7 to 30 days from the baby being born. And also it allows to expand it from just hospitals to police stations and fire stations, and I have the full support of all newborn babies. Any questions?
No, I'll give you a statement. Don't come back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Willard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring to you House Bill 434, second from the top on the third page. This is a bill that I think all the cities and counties are happy to see come forward. It's been worked out with the realtors who really look to the protection of the private property of our state. It's worked out a means by which blighted property can be acquired through condemnation, but you have to first go through a court proceeding to have that determined by the by the Superior Court that it is in fact blighted property, and everyone has to be notified who has an interest in it. We have too many of these properties since we passed the provisions back in 2006 that have continued to grow like a cancer in a lot of the cities, and this allows the local governments to find a way to eventually have these properties declared blight and then be able to have them sold to a third party, but they have to use it in the same use that the property was prior to the acquisition, which means residential to residential. So this is the means by which we would have that happen. So you have a Superior Court first make the determination, and parties could appeal that all the way up to the Supreme Court. Once that's established, then there could be a condemnation to acquire the property.
If you've got questions, remember, raise your hands. No question. Mr. Coomer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm asking for the amendment on the member's desk, AM 292592. And the copy on the desks is signed only by me, but the copy we're filing with the clerk's office, hopefully this morning, will be signed also by Chairman Ballinger, who's the sponsor of the bill. Essentially, it addresses some potential constitutional problems with regard to the name change of children in House Bill 279, and I think this will clean it up and help us get the bill through.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and vote. This is just the amendment. It'll be on the floor, so do I have a motion? All those in favor signify by aye. Aye. It's on. Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 3 bills on structured rule. The first one is House Bill 325. Just says that if you're a commercial property and the income approach is used for that property's value, that you may use your own income and expenses on that valuation. The House Bill 325.
We got questions, Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Stevens, what is the current rule?
The current rule essentially uses like properties for your income approach, which is rather arbitrary, and at times it is grossly different from a commercial property rather than your income, your actual income of that property that's generating income.
So if I get a piece of property and do some low rent use to it and my income is low, I lower my taxes that way?
If you bring your income, your actual income, and you're willing to share that with your expenses to the Board of Equalization, yes, sir.
Even if I could use a higher use for the property, it's not valued once again on the value of the property. We're strictly going to do it on income.
But currently, it's an arbitrary method that it's essentially like the comps. But if you're willing to share that information, yes, sir.
Thank
you. Next
one. House Bill 354 changes the Savannah International Maritime Trade Center to the Georgia International Maritime Trade Center as a statewide authority, mirrors its current manager with the World Congress Center.
Next one.
And the last one is House Bill 357, is a free title boat bill that the people that currently register your boats, if you would like a title to go to the bank, they will generate one for you free of charge and no cost to the state.
No questions. Mr. Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring before you House Bill 276. This is the Pharmacy Patient Fair Practices Act. This is a bill that is focused on patient-focused bill that help ensure, among other things, that patients are not forced to mail order pharmacies that are inconvenient. Patient copays are not higher than their drug cost. I'll repeat that one, Mr. Chairman. Copays are not higher than their drug cost, and that no one interferes with the pharmacy's ability to counsel and educate their patients regarding cheaper alternatives. I'll also remind the chairman of the committee that this is the same bill that is traveling on the Senate side, and we are identical to the bill that's on the Senate side.
Mr. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under structured rule, HB 329 is a modification of the current existing income tax law. It does 4 things. It flattens the rate so that there are no graduated or brackets, and it reduces the top rate from 6 to 5.4%. Eliminates the sales tax exemption for Georgia income tax. Currently, you can deduct Georgia income tax on both the federal and the state return. Georgia's only one of 4 states that allows that. This brings us in line with what other states that have income tax are doing. Third thing it does is institutes a work credit at 10% of the federal earned income credit, but limits it to just the amount that is paid in taxes rather than making it a refundable credit, unlike the federal credit. And the fourth thing it does is indexes for inflation the personal and dependents exemptions and the standard deduction.
No questions.
Okay. I also have H.R. 158, which is the dedication of revenues constitutional amendment that I brought to the committee last week. I have H.R. 51, which is a constitutional amendment that changes the way that we value property under the Forest Land Protection Act. Basically, it does away with the 2008 base value that's in the Constitution, because that is now, some 9 years later, becoming a very difficult methodology for valuing forest land protection. And then there's HB 85, which is under modified structured rule on the second page, which is the enabling act that goes with HR 51.
You want to do 225 too?
No, sir, not just yet.
Doesn't seem to be any questions. While we got him, on your desk you have a substitute for HB 85.
Yes, sir. The substitute makes one change that was contemplated by the committee, but we later discovered after the committee passed it out had not been changed by Legislative Council. On line 92 in the version prepared by Legislative Council, it said 1% and it should have been 3%, and that's the only change in the substitute.
Okay, that comes under Scribner's era. Do I need a motion? Have a motion. All those in favor signify by aye. It's done.
Would it be appropriate at this time to move that be placed under structure rule?
You can ask.
I would so move.
All right, he's asked for that to be put under structured. Anybody got a problem? It's under structured. Ms. Dempsey.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring before you at the bottom of page 2, under modified HB 344. This addresses some cleanup in the paternity bill that was passed 2 years ago. The word movement was inserted during the Judiciary Committee. You cannot, it's become a brick wall, actually, for the department to deal with, because a movement is someone who has already filed a motion to disestablish paternity, and you cannot do that without a paternity test. So this clarifies, particularly for those who might be assumed to be a father in those child support payments, to clarify.
No questions. Ms. Abrams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to ask for HB 330 and HB 331 to support our kinship caregiving families. In addition, I'd like to put and these are all under modified open rule on the first page, HB 330 and HB 331. I would also like to put my name beside HB 78, the SEC cleanup bill, and HB 234, the crosswalk bill.
Mr. A. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for a couple of bills. HB 260. This is a special license plate bill that's being promoted by Georgia EMC. They've put up about $25,000 on account at the Revenue Department to sell these bills. It's a Thank a Lineman's bill. They'll be responsible for selling these tags, and all the proceeds from these sales will go to the Southeastern Burn Foundation so that they can make donations to the burn hospitals in the state of Georgia.
No questions.
Section 149. This is a registration and regulation act for the companies called the Trauma Scene Cleanups. Registers them with the GBI. Basically allows that the principals of the company that's responsible for going into people's houses, do cleanup and things like this, that they're not a convicted felon, that they've got insurance and they've got a bond, and they dispose of the bio waste as pursuant to EPD regulations.
No questions. Mr. Caldwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring two bills today under modified structure, HB 5 and HB 323. HB 5 is a juvenile court bill to increase the pay for the juvenile court judges that are only part of judiciary, has not had a raise since 2000. The money has been placed in the budget on the House side, and I understand also on the Senate side, appropriations is good with it, and so is all the committees as far as I know, Mr. Chairman. The second bill is 323. This is the code revision bill we bring every year to clean up the code, where we dot the I's, cross the T's, put in the commas, and change and to or to and. It's 52 pages, but it's the annual bill.
I can't wait. No, right, no, we got that you and Mr. Harrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll ask for under structure and rule on page 3, House Bill 204, which cleans up our property tax bills by removing non-ad valorem items.
No questions. Mr. Smith.
Yes, I asked for House Bill 71, and hopefully we'll get rid of these surprise bills that people get after they leave the hospital.
Mr. Williamson, have you got an ask?
What's your number? Push your button.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I come today to ask for under structured rule, page 3, House Bill 337, State Tax Execution Modernization Act. This is a Department of Revenue bill creating the Georgia Tax Lien Registry. Comes in collaboration with the Georgia Superior Court Clerk's Authority, which would be administering the process. It comes without objection from the State Bar, title insurers, and banking community. Be happy to answer questions.
Okay, y'all ready? Well, let's do one more here. Ms. Abrams, you got an amendment?
I understand that I understand that Chairwoman Smith is not asking for the bill today, so we want to hold on the amendment.
I didn't hear you.
I understand that Chairwoman Smith is not asking for the bill today, so we were going to hold on the amendment to see if we could work with her to fix it.
Thank you. Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I concur, and I'm ever hopeful that we'll find a solution. So thank you so much.
Okay. All right, we're setting it for Tuesday. Under modified open, HB 87. Any opposition? It's modified open, HB 234. Any opposition? It's modified open, HB 322. Any opposition? It's under modified open, HB 382. Any opposition? It's modified open, HB 422. Any opposition? It's modified structure, HB 71. Any opposition? It's modified structure, HB 260. Any opposition? It's Modified structure, HB 276. Any opposition? It's modified structure, HB 287. Any opposition? It's modified structure, HB 319. Any opposition? So, modified structure, HB 323. Any opposition? It's under structure, HB 204. It's under structured, HB 217. Have an objection? All those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. No. The ayes have it. It's I guess, Jay, I'm just going to do all yours on Friday. You are going to be here this Friday, right? Oh, okay. That's enough.